Good morning, everyone. It is 9 o'clock and we have a lot of content and conversation for everyone today, so we will start right on time. First, I just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining the discussion today. As a lot of you know, today's labor shortage presents an opportunity to talk about the untapped sectors of our workforce. And in recognition of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, we're here to discuss the challenges and best practices for employers and utilizing some underutilized segments of our workforce, including people with disabilities. From the outset, I just want to acknowledge that this panel is focused on the employer experience and that of our state regulators, but the voices of individuals with disabilities is incredibly valued in this discussion, and much of what you'll hear today from employers is rooted in the work that they do, which is informed by individuals with disabilities every day. I'd also encourage you, anyone watching today, to check out the content that all of our panelists have been sharing throughout this month in recognition of Disability Employment Awareness Month, which specifically highlights the successes and challenges of individuals with disabilities in their employment pursuits. I'm Elizabeth Emerson. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs at Goff Public, and I'm going to be your moderator today. Goff Public is a proud partner of MDI, and I'm happy to be here today. I spent a lot of time with lawmakers, and I'm honored to tell the story of MDI, which you'll hear about later today. I'm most excited for this conversation because it is part of that awareness building that needs to happen. And I can attest firsthand that as you talk to lawmakers, they are blown away by the impact that each of the employers today here are making and how they are addressing our workforce challenges. So I'm excited for this conversation, and I look forward to introducing you to our panelists. So panelists, if you'd like to turn your videos on, we will begin with introductions. I want to highlight, we did ask each of our panelists to answer just a couple of questions about why they're passionate about inclusive workplaces and some of their most recent accomplishments. So as I read their introductions, please feel free to read their comments that are highlighted on the screen. We'll start out with our Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, Steve Grove. Hi, Commissioner. As Commissioner of DEED, Steve Grove is focused on empowering the growth of the Minnesota economy for everyone. Under his leadership, the department works on growing the state's workforce, closing the opportunity gap, and providing businesses and startups the support they need to grow and thrive in Minnesota's economy. Two of DEED's divisions that focus on connecting people with disabilities with inclusive employment opportunities are vocational rehabilitation services and state services for the blind. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. Welcome. Dawn Kirchner is with Mayo Clinic, and she is a diversity recruitment specialist. Dawn is part of the workforce development team in human resources at Mayo Clinic. In her role, she develops and maintains strategic relationships with local, regional, and national organizations and associations with the goal of connecting people with disabilities to careers at Mayo Clinic. Dawn is the Project Search Business Liaison at Mayo Clinic and serves on the Board of Directors for Disability In and as Board Chair of Maxability in Southeast Minnesota. Thanks so much for being here, Dawn. Next, we have Mike Wall. Mike is the Assistant Vice President for Sales and Account Manager at Optum, which is a division of United Health Group, whose mission is to help people live healthier lives and help the health system work better for everyone. UHG, United Health Group, is focused on advancing a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment where all team members feel welcomed, valued, respected, and heard. Mike has also served as board chair of the ARC Minnesota, which provides advocacy services for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Thanks for being here, Mike. Next, we have Paul Dimett. He is the lead production supervisor for Boston Scientific's Maple Grove facility. In addition to his daily manufacturing operations role, Paul has spent the last 4 years leading the local employment resource group, LEAD, which stands for Leadership, Education, and Allies for Disabilities. Boston Scientific has over 41,000 employees at 164 sites across the globe and is dedicated to transforming lives through innovative medical solutions that improve the health of patients around the world. Recognized as best place to work for disability inclusion, Boston Scientific has several initiatives underway globally to increase disability employment, including strategic business partnerships locally with companies such as Mindshift and MDI. Hi, Paul. Thanks for being here. Joy Kiefer is the president of Mindshift. Joy started her career working as a teacher and special education director and transitioned to her current role as president of Mindshift. Mindshift's goal is to help businesses employ the strengths of people who are on the autism spectrum by providing autism in the workplace training for businesses and person-specific training for managers and teams. Mindshift works across Minnesota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, and Colorado. And currently 30+ large and small businesses contract with Mindshift to employ more than 100 people who work in manufacturing, data tech, non-clinical healthcare, and administrative services roles. Welcome, Joy. Next up, we have Angie and Kyle Gallus, who are the co-founders of Finley's Barkery. Kyle and Angie have founded Finley's, which is a premium pet brand committed to employment and giving initiatives for people with disabilities. Finley's was recently acquired by Tuffy's Pet Treats, a division of KLN Family Brands. Kyle serves as the Vice President of Brand Development, and Angie serves as the Vice President of Mission Advancement for the Finley's brand at KLN. Welcome, Kyle and Angie. And finally, we have Eric Black, who is the President and CEO at Minnesota Diversified Industries. Eric is an accomplished executive and commercial manufacturing thought leader who joined MDI as President and CEO in 2021. MDI's mission is to serve people with disabilities by offering inclusive employment opportunities and services in a growing manufacturing environment, delivering corrugated plastic packaging solutions, production services, and medical device assembly. And we welcome you, Eric, and thanks for hosting the conversation today. So we are all finished hearing from me, hopefully, and we will turn over the conversation to our panelists. We've selected a few questions in advance, but we definitely encourage those of you watching to drop a question in the chat or Q&A function, and we will get to those after we hear some initial thoughts from our panelists. So I want to start we'll divide up a few of these questions so we don't have all of you answering, but I want to start the first question. This will go to the Commissioner, Eric, Angie, Kyle, and Joy. What is something that was unexpected as an employer or commissioner that you did not realize when you started this journey in working with people with disabilities? And we will have Eric lead off.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
And I really, truly appreciate our panelists being here today. You know, sometimes I'm asked to speak on panels, and this is one that I'm going to love being kind of actually an attendee, because I think the things that you're doing are inspirational, and I admire each of you. A couple of the things that I found as an employer, people with disabilities, is it helped me to overcome the biases I had with dealing with the group in general, right? I think growing up and then through most of my adult career, I had a lot of biases, and as a leader of an institution, you actually bring those biases with you. Being here at MDI has really helped me to break down a lot of those biases, which has helped along the whole diversity spectrum of inclusion, which I think has been phenomenal. We have a manufacturing facility, and we tend to think that people with disabilities are less productive than others. And I've found that to not be true across many of our lines. We have a lot of individuals that are running above 100% productivity in the work that they do. And they add a ton of value for the customer perspective that we have. We've had phenomenal customer feedback surveys, which has shown the work and effort that we put into in our delivery of our product is above what they're seeing in our industry standards. So for me, that's been a really great part of it. And I think the last part I'll mention is around accommodations. We frequently think of accommodations as being burdensome on the employer, and I found that not to be the case. I really found that they're minimal in nature. Usually it's around time and schedule as it fits the transportation, but the benefits you get, we've seen from having an inclusive work environment with people with disabilities, it's a multiple effect across. And so accommodations just are minimal, and they're not really these huge barriers that we think about and complex.
Thank you. Maybe Commissioner Grove, if you want to share a few thoughts aside from a global pandemic that maybe you didn't expect when you took over as commissioner, maybe a few things from the department's perspective that were unexpected.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth. And I just appreciate the chance to be here with so many great leaders in this space. And Eric, thanks for kicking us off. I completely agree with what all of you said. I think one of the things that I've really learned from our team, we have just a great team here at Deed focused on helping people with disabilities find work, both through our vocational rehabilitation services unit and our state services for the blind, is that when you're working with people with disabilities and employers, I think it's easy to focus on the disability and not the ability. But if you're someone who's lived with a disability your whole life, you actually bring a whole other set of superpowers that those of us who might not have that disability don't possess. If you're a person with disabilities, you're a natural problem solver. You've had to figure out how to make it around in this world with your disability and learn how to be creative and problem solving in that sense. The loyalty that people with disabilities have towards their employers, the belief in the work and the kind of the value of it. They don't take anything for granted if you've had to live with a disability. Those are huge superpowers in a workforce. And I think more and more employers are realizing that. And I think also when employers make their workplaces, friendly to people with disabilities and they hire people with disabilities, it makes the workplace better for everyone. And that's why integrated employment is so important. When you have people from different backgrounds coming together and working together, you have a richer work environment, you have a stronger work environment. And I think that's something that employers who invest in this labor force, which I think is far too underexamined in our state, they see much bigger benefits than just filling a job at their firm. They see the ability to create a more diverse space, to take advantage of some of those superpowers, and to create a workplace that feels more welcoming and diverse for everyone. To Eric's point on accommodations, he's exactly right. The accommodations, I think, scare some employers off. Not only, I think, are they not nearly what you might imagine they need to be, but there's help. Our team at Deed will come in and we can help free of charge evaluate what's needed, how to get there. And in many cases, if the cost is challenging for an employer, we can pay for it as well. So, there may be some accommodations needed for some employers based on the folks that they hire, but this is exactly why government programs work, to fill that market gap, to make it more possible and easier to happen. And I think that's a misconception that I think a lot of employers might have at the start that bears focus here.
Thank you. Maybe Angie and Kyle, talk to us a little bit about your journey and some of the unexpected things you encountered.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you for having us as well. Totally agree with what the commissioner said. I think one of the things that we have seen is the value of having people come into a retailer, for example, as our team does. When we first started in the retail space, when we would come in with our team members and set them up, we would see some of the workers at the stores just kind of not really know what to say to them, not really know how to help, not really know, if they should get involved. And over time, as our teams have been able to be in the space, we've seen all these staff members at the stores really start to embrace them, and they become part of the staff, they become part of the family. And I do just really feel like people don't know. They aren't sure how to address our team members. They aren't sure because they haven't been educated. And Kyle and I are both former special education teachers. And so for us, it was easy. And I think we forget that sometimes when we see them start in a new space, that other people haven't been educated. They don't have our background. And they do need that education. They need that help to help get them started, but eventually they see that culture change across the whole company. And it's just really exciting to see.
Yeah, I think I look at it too from, a sales standpoint, and there's that initial hesitation around even, there's going to be accommodations at the retail level. And it's like, no, what would you do for a completely abled person on your staff? What's your expectations? Because those are the same expectations we have. And guess what? Our team members are going to come in and they're going to better the process. They're going to tell Lunds Byerly's or Chuck and Don's, they're going to tell them additional opportunities to better serve their customers that we don't have perspective on. And I think that's kind of the unique piece from that, when a buyer or at the retail level, they go, oh, what should I expect? It's like, just make it as normal as possible and you're going to be blown away. And I think that's kind of the fun, but yet unexpected journey and learning we've seen.
Joy, I'd be interested in your perspective. It feels like we might have a majority of former special education teachers on the line, but I'd be interested even with kind of that background, things that you found unexpected at Mindshift. Oh, we got you on mute, Joy.
I did plan to turn that on. That's a good question. And it really is all encompassing for me, not just when I started Mindshift, but as I started my career and moved in this direction. I knew that all people were unique, but what I didn't really totally understand was how my perceptions and how the perceptions of others really can color the relationship. Because one of the most enlightening things to me was when I was first started as a special ed director. I walked into a classroom and a teacher said, you know, I can tell by the time a child finishes kindergarten whether they're going to be in special ed or not. And I was like, really? That's interesting. So I explored that comment and I found that there's actually been studies on it, that human beings can 50% of the time predict an outcome accurately with other people, 50%, which to me is a flip of a coin. 50% of the time you're right and 50% of the time you're wrong. And so I really challenged that and said, what evidence do you have? What demonstrates that a person needs an accommodation? What is your hypothesis? How are you going to test it out? So I challenged my own thoughts when I went into a situation, and I encouraged teachers and other individuals in the schools to do the same thing, to use the scientific method to really analyze what's going on. And I challenged businesses and teams to do that same thing now, because we are woefully, as a human race, inadequate at judging a person and really having a clear picture of what the skills and capabilities are. So by doing that, I look at, what do I think about this person? Is my thinking accurate? If it isn't accurate, how do I find out? And how do I then interact in a way that is more accurate? And how do I listen to people to really hear what they have to say and not overlay that with my biases?
Thank you. Paul, Mike, and Dawn, you have a little bit different perspective to share. You're all in very large organizations. And I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of how you as individual company leaders seek to make your workplaces more inclusive, and kind of how the journey that you individually have been on within that larger context of a large employer, and what advice you would have for others that are seeking to make similar changes about inclusivity in their workplace. And maybe since you're nodding, Paul, we'll start with you.
I'll let Todd. Well, thanks for having me. It's great, great conversation so far. I would say, you know, size of company doesn't really matter. If you're not making an effort, then it's not going to happen. Boston Scientific, for as large as it is, this has really been a grassroots effort at Maple Grove and within Arden Hills and what we've done here in Minnesota. But it really just takes, you know, a person or two to be champions that believe in what it takes, and then to really look around, see where the opportunities are. Someone had already made the comment that you know, it's not the disability that we're looking at employing, it's the ability of the person, right? And so when you have a manufacturing site as large as Maple Grove is, with over 2,000 direct labor people, there are a ton of physicians that are absolutely employable with people with disabilities. It's just a matter of getting out there, touring, see what works. You know, doesn't mean you're going to hit it out of the park every time, but if you're not doing anything, then you're stalled out.
Dawn, how about at Mayo?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for letting me join this panel. And so there's so many pieces of the puzzle to make sure that you have an inclusive work environment. Some specific examples that we've done at Mayo Clinic is partner with Destination Medical Center, and early on got some training on universal design, because we need the whole community to be accessible and make sure that we have, as we build new infrastructure and spaces down in Southeast Minnesota, that we've got the voice of disability at the table to make sure that transportation is working, that the new Peace Plaza, everybody can access the fountain, or all of the curb cuts are accessible, because not only are we making the changes for our employees with disabilities, but all of our patients maybe are going through an experience where their experience of medical condition that needs some of this accessibility included as well. So just thinking about universal design in your spaces and your systems. I also think about our application systems and how can they be more universal. So like Paul was saying, people come to us with strengths, but so many times our application systems are screening people out, opposed to looking at what skills they're bringing to the job, and then how can we make that job description be more inclusive to attract all talent. And then the other thing I wanted to add here too is just the importance of language. So even when we're branding our companies to welcome people in, thinking about that person first language, that identity first language, making sure that as you're coming through orientation, you're feeling like you belong and you can bring your whole self to work, and it's okay to disclose. So getting awareness out to staff on the importance of language and education so that people can navigate those conversations smoothly.
And Mike, from your perspective, would you have kind of a bit of advice for others that are looking to build on the culture of inclusivity?
Yes, and thank you for this opportunity to compare notes and share best practices. So I think the couple pieces of advice. One is to start small. I mean, we're a large organization, and we piloted a 12 to 15 week internship program in the fall of 2020 with 16 interns, with a variety of jobs that align with the business needs and the candidate's strengths and talents. So positions like shipping clerk in our pharmacy division, or data entry support, or support on customer calls. All these were positions that we worked closely with the hiring managers on. And then to source them, we worked with Voc Rehab to help us find the candidates that to match up with the job descriptions. The program that's now in its third year. We're in 15 states. And we've learned something each year as we've developed it. 70% of the people in that internship program are now full-time employees. I think one of the lessons learned as we developed this program was to really talk to the people on our workforce who had disabilities. And one of the greatest accommodations that I learned from a person with autism, and this is all pre-COVID, but the greatest accommodation we were making for him was the opportunity to work from home. And as many of you know, people with autism, don't always function as optimally when there's a lot of distractions and a lot of noise. The opportunity to control their environment and work from home really made a difference. And I just want to add one of the unanticipated benefits, and I think Commissioner Grove touched on this. It certainly was a win for the intern. Certainly was a win for United Health Group to really mirror and understand people with disabilities that we're fortunate to serve with our health and wellness services. But the unanticipated win was the impact on our workforce engagement. There were so many people that were touched or uplifted when they heard about this internship program. And I'll never forget the email I got in the fall of 2020 from a mom who basically feels proud to work at United Health Group because we have this program. It gives her hope because she has a niece with a disability. So the engagement across the board, and Paul and Dawn have mentioned this, it's really changed our culture for the better. So really pilot first and then scale. talk to the people with disabilities on your workforce, and really support the interns with buddies. We learned this from Special Olympics experience. When you can match people on the workforce with buddies and mentors who can help navigate a large organization and ultimately find long-term employment, that's a win-win-win for everyone.
Thanks, Mike. Commissioner, maybe we'll turn the next question and have you go first. We talked a little bit about kind of the opportunities that are there, but I think it's important to also call out how much work there is left to be done and some of the challenges. So would love your perspective from a state level on what are your identified challenges that your agency has identified as challenges to getting people with disabilities more integrated into the workplace. And are you seeing any trends by sectors that might be more challenged than others?
Well, it's a great question. And I think, obviously it's National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And on the first day of the month, I went by the Capitol and toured a really extraordinary exhibit that was put up by many of our state government colleagues. It just sort of charted the history of people with disabilities in Minnesota and the journey that those individuals have gone through, and those who've advocated for changes in workplace accommodations and just general perceptions of that opportunity, that market. And it's really kind of a stunning look at the history. It is not a pleasant history in our state, but it's certainly a journey that has transformed and evolved over time to the place where we are today, when I think we have made a lot of progress. But there are still a lot of misperceptions out there. I think there's still a lot of lack of awareness of what it means to hire a person with disabilities. And the nature of disability itself has changed. Mental illness and disabilities that you can't necessarily see have gained more, I think, exposure and awareness in society, and given employers, I think, a different view of that. When you take it in totality, you see that everyone in this call, everyone listening knows somebody with a disability who's working in some way or another and making their way. And so perceptions have shifted, but there's a real need, I think, to keep our foot on the gas pedal here. We still see big gaps between people with disabilities and those without, when it comes to pay, when it comes to opportunity, when it comes to all of the economic indicators you look at. So I think part of it is panels like this and conversations that change the perception of what is there. But I'll say this: when you have a state like we do in Minnesota that has the tightest labor market in the entire country, we have 4 open jobs for every 1 person searching for one. That is a tremendous opportunity to shift perception and to get employers who aren't like the ones who are on this panel and are very enlightened about this topic to look in places they wouldn't have looked before. And so we've just spent a lot of time, my colleagues, Natasha Jerde at the State Services for the Blind and Dee Torgerson over at Vocational Rehabilitation Services, this entire year in particular, really helping employers find their way to job seekers here and understand exactly what it means to make hiring in this space. You'll hear great tips again from all my colleagues here on the panel, but I think part of it from a state government perspective is just shifting perception and then taking advantage of new opportunities. I mean, one of the things that we're most excited about in our department is the way that technology has changed this space. It is hard to overstate just what an influence new developments in tech have made for people with disabilities and their ability not just to live life, but to work. You look at apps like Ira that help give you a real-time guide as you're walking through a space if you're visually impaired. Efforts like that, way around this new technology where you can clip things with little Bluetooth devices that help you understand what you're seeing based on your smartphone. It has really transformed the space, and I think it's just a time of real possibility here. And for government, our perspective is let's accelerate that transition so that Minnesota can remain really a national leader when it comes to hiring people with disabilities, and we can help meet businesses' needs at a time when simply every single business we talk to today is hiring and struggling to find workers. So I do think it's a moment of opportunity, but it takes a collective effort to get there.
Eric, I might ask you to go next. I know MDI does a fair amount of work with other employers, just identifying kind of the challenges that you're hearing from other employers as you seek to increase. And I know I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to pick up on the technology piece and how MDI is thinking about technology as well.
Yeah, so I'll take a slightly different approach than I will talk about tech. I think some of the struggles we've seen is also on the side of getting people with disabilities introduced into the workforce. And so some of their very much their advocates and their supporters have to be willing and open that employment's the right opportunity. I think Joy mentioned this, but some people have biases early on, and sometimes that's an individual's advocate. I also think that employers have found some complexity with navigating services for people with disabilities. So sometimes they're receiving state services, sometimes they're receiving financial benefits, and they're trying to figure out, how do I augment this? How do I have employment but not lose these things over here? And it's not very intuitive, because their fear is, once I lose it, will I ever get it back, or how long will it take me to get it back? And so I think advocacy and education is a key part for both the employers and those being introduced, that we make it as simple and as enriching as possible for individuals to come in the fray. I think Commissioner Grove is 100% correct. Technology has changed both ends, and it's helped to augment the way we can do things. It's been very much a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 type ratio where we're trying to integrate people. Technology has allowed us to have 1-to-10, 1-to-100 type impact on individuals. And so MDI has kind of committed ourselves to finding ways of having disruptive technology to create increased access for tools for both employers and people with disabilities. That way we can get a multiple effect that allows people with disabilities to have what I would call the career skills or the communication skills that come into place. And so we're using things like virtual reality that allows them to have an experience before their experience. So we can work with employers, put together kind of a scene within their own working infrastructure, and then people can try that job out to make sure it's a fit. And I think Michael talked about, you have to have a number of jobs because you're trying to find a fit and a match between the individual and what they want to do and what they identify as success and the role and job that you're trying to offer. And so I do think technology used wisely can help create the stickiness between employers and people with disabilities, that both are having an enriched environment when this takes place.
Thanks, Joy. I'd love your reactions to that, and if that kind of aligns with what you're seeing as you're looking at placements and working with other employers.
Yeah, it does really. I mean, we're all talking about similar kinds of things. You know, what the biggest challenge is to be able to take the time to get to know an individual and understand what the individual needs and learns, whether you're the case manager or whatever organization you are in. The individual knowledge is really important. And you know, it probably is something that stems from my special ed background, and really looking at what is an individual's strengths, what are their needs, what are their hopes and desires, and how are they able to express themselves and communicate with that. The business then, how does that fit in the business structure of hiring, where someone talked, I think it was you, Dawn, about adjusting the application process so that you can get the information you really need, not just to get a list of things that we get for everybody, but what do you need to understand this individual and bring them into the workforce. So it takes the time to do that. It takes time to prepare and plan to bring someone into the organization who maybe has different needs than another person. That doesn't negate that they have the skills, but it takes the time to do that. And then it takes time to really listen to someone who maybe communicates in a different way that you're not used to. And that is a time issue. So what is it? What does that person need? What would be most helpful to them? And it takes time for us to really parse through that information and test it against our biases and say, sure, we can do that. We might not have done it before, but it is something you need. We can do that.
Angie and Kyle, I would imagine you have both challenges that you've experienced, but I would imagine you have business colleagues or entrepreneurs that come up to you and ask kind of, how did you do this? How did you start? What advice do you share with them, or what challenges do you hear identified by those other kind of entrepreneurs most often? And how are you responding to some of those challenges that they express?
Yeah, I think you nailed it with how do you start? Well, you just start. You have to try, right? And I think anybody on this journey knows it's not a perfect journey, right? Like, and I think that's okay. What's most important is that you involve and you have representation at the table with any decisions you make, if you're having a discussion on, hey, this is what we're thinking of doing, well, do you have the right stakeholders? And those stakeholders are the individuals that you want to serve. And I think we've seen it not just in the entrepreneurial world. We've had major retailers say, hey, we this is what we want to do. And our number one question is, well, who was at the table when you first discussed this? And typically the light bulb kind of goes off. It's not meant to be a gotcha question. It's meant to be, are we thinking from the start? Once you have, executive buy-in, who is at the table helping you frame how you want to move forward? Because it's a big decision to say you want to start, and everybody knows you have to try. But who's going to come along that journey from the early decisions to the different iterations, the improvements? Just for us, it's who's at the table, who's your mentors, who's your stakeholders involved in the conversation. If you don't have the right representation, get the right representation.
Yeah, and just making them feel valued. It's, everybody seems to assume that they know what everybody needs, and having somebody with a disability at the table, asking them what they need. It is, they want to share with you, this is what I need for an accommodation, or I can't do it that way. Can I try it this way? And having an open mind and allowing them to be the one to tell you what they need. But I would say another challenge that we see, and as I've worked with other organizations across the state and out of state, transportation is probably our biggest challenge. Many of our ambassadors, for example, don't live within the metro region, where they can necessarily maybe sign up for a Metro Mobility ride to have that scheduled. And if they're not in a certain region, that ride can get canceled the night before, the morning of. And that's been really a challenge for us, is just getting these guys to the retail store, getting them to their job. And so having spoke with many of our ambassadors, that is a huge stress for them. They're so proud to have a job and to find this job. And then to have that stress of knowing I might not be able to get there tomorrow, it's unfair to them. And that's a challenge that we see quite frequently, actually.
I want to shift from maybe some of the more kind of strategic or tactical questions to a little bit broader. And Don, Mike, and Paul, I'm going to modify your next question just a little bit, but I've heard you all kind of speak to it. I'm curious, as a lot of employers are having conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, how are you or your teams ensuring that individuals with disability are squarely in that conversation? Because certainly that term is being used by a lot of employers to mean a lot of different things, but how are you thinking about that, and how are your employers thinking about it and ensuring that individuals with disabilities are square in that conversation? And maybe I'll start with Mike.
Great. Well, that's a great question. And I really think we need to look at the intersection of disability and race and gender. And Jean points out a couple other things in the chat. And that's when we really can start to understand, what the real needs are. But the short answer to your question, Elizabeth, is call them in, bring them in. Have them be part of the planning process, have them be they have the lived experience, and they can help solve these issues. And I think transportation, I really want to stress that, that Angie brought up. How can we look to public-private partnerships in this regard? And I just want to highlight a success story with Dakota County and Lyft. Right? The average person with disabilities works 8 hours a week. That's what my daughter's working today at Trader Joe's. And she's benefited from all the great education system. How do we expand that? Well, in Dakota County, the average person who's been participating in the Lyft transportation program with Dakota County is working 20 hours a week. 20 hours a week. Not only is that a less burden on the county, but it's also an empowering opportunity for people with disabilities to then start thinking about how to pay for rent and live a healthy and good life. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to work together, both public and private, and with other companies in this area to really, address the diversity, equity, and inclusion question.
Paul, would love your thoughts on how kind of Boston Scientific has approached this.
Well, I think one of the nice things that we have with the ERGs is we have an ERG within LEAD that is able to help be that advocacy for those with disabilities. We have multiple campaigns that we do every year. Make Way Day, for instance, is an opportunity for all employees to come together and walk through the facility, understand, what limitations physically might be in there that would be in the way of someone that was trying to move through the hallway in a wheelchair, for example. We've got a sunflower campaign, which is just launched this year globally, which is just a visual identifier for people who have disabilities, that they can wear it, or that support people with disabilities, that they know that that's a safe person that they can reach out to, talk to, work with. And then community engagement really is a big thing for us at Boston Scientific. So the best way to normalize things is for us to get out into the community and work in events and fundraising with Special Olympics Minnesota, for example, where we're bringing our employees out to these opportunities and events, so that when we're bringing people who identify with having a disability to the workplace, there's that common connection already, because they've been working with unified flag football, or they've done the polar plunge and things like that.
Dawn, would love your thoughts on kind of how Mayo is approaching. And I do want to just highlight Commissioner Grove's comments that his team at DEED reminds us that diversity, equity, and inclusion should be also diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which I think is a great thought. But would love your thoughts on how Mayo is thinking about this conversation.
Yeah, I think with that workplace equity, Paul mentioned the ERG or BRG. So again, there's so much knowledge within our disability employment groups that we can tap into and listen to those voices. Recently at our Disability Male Employee Resource Group, we're re-electing officers for this year. And one exciting thing that's happening is instead of allies being in the leadership roles, we actually have employees with disabilities now applying for those leadership roles. And that's where I think we should all be striving to move away from these leadership conversations of us replacing or as we are allies for people with disabilities, move out of the way and make sure we're mentoring somebody to bring into the role so they're at that leadership table. The other thing too is just thinking about more accommodation knowledge. Not that we need more accommodations, but when will we get to the place where it's not an accommodation, but it's just built in? I kind of go back to that universal design principle, and that remember the resources that are out there that can help you on your disability inclusive journey with Disability in Minnesota, the ARC Minnesota, Voc Rehab. The Career Force has wonderful bite-sized learning modules. If you're trying to learn more about accommodations, self-ID campaigns, we've talked about that, mental health matters. So really tapping into the resources and networking with other companies. They're happy to share their knowledge, but coming together and with dedicated time monthly to have conversations like this is the way we're going to move forward into that more equitable employment experience for people with disabilities.
Thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge we have a lot of questions in the chat and the Q&A, which is fantastic. I'd love to start out with one of those, and maybe I'll turn it over to Commissioner Grove, and I'm going to combine a couple of the questions, but one talks about a little bit of internal capacity, how you're ensuring that leaders, supervisors, kind of your entire organization is accessibility informed, and kind of thinking of that at the forefront, but then also talking about any dedicated accommodation solutions teams. But I'd love your kind of perspective from DEED, and then I'm going to kind of quickly go around the entire horn and get folks' thoughts on things that they might be doing internally, because I think these are kind of the best practices that people are looking for. So, Commissioner?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And it's a great question. And I'll be brief here. I think I typed some of this in the chat, but one of the things that's important is to have, in a large organization like ours, we're about 1,400 people at Deed, is to make sure that you have champions, right? People across divisions who understand accessibility and can be just on the lookout for it within their divisions, right? Where does it play out with if you're posting a blog, is it accessibility and can you read it? If you're hosting a forum, is there, interpretation and sign language capacity there for those who may not be able to hear? Those sorts of champions help kind of drive that lens for everyone. And then we have a very kind of simple couple module course that speaks to the importance of accessibility that we ask everyone at Deed to take. And it's not particularly onerous, but it just gives you that sense of like, oh, I didn't, you might say, I didn't know about this world. I didn't know what these things were. Now I have a bit of a sense for what this is all about and why it's important. I will say for me, coming into this work three and a half years ago, I didn't know much about the field of accessibility, frankly. And it was really eye-opening for me to understand just how challenging it is for many folks to navigate our resources, even navigate our department without some of this training. So it's been for me a learning journey too that I've really appreciated. And I think having those champions really helps.
Maybe Angie and Kyle, maybe if you could talk about how you've carried kind of that accessibility or inclusion mindset as Finley's transitioned into the KLN brand, and how you've thought about kind of that transition and making sure that there is broad recognition and folks are informed.
Yeah, so we actually are going to be part of a training with our manufacturing facilities coming up here in November. They've asked Kyle and I to come in and we're going to be training all of our supervisors, all of our managers, and eventually staff. So we sat down together and just came up with, okay, what are some really good ways that we can educate staff on, from the interview process to the application process, all of that. And then as they go out onto the floor, because the one thing that we do realize is sometimes people won't disclose they have a disability in an interview. And so if they're hired, sometimes we're not finding out they have a disability until they're out on the floor. And so we were brought in to kind of talk about what are some ways we can improve that process, for one. And then now we are going to be part of our training for all of our facilities, both here in Delano and up in Perham, training our managers and supervisors about inclusion and how to work with somebody with a disability and how to include them in that process.
That's great. And I think you have some other potential panelist partners that could come to the training here on the call.
For sure. I want that virtual reality. That sounds amazing.
Maybe Joy and Eric, I might ask the two of you to share some thoughts from your perspective on maybe both your organizations as employers, but also as you're working with other employers as well, how you're ensuring that from supervisors, managers to your frontline staff are all accessibility informed. And then to the question of if you have dedicated accommodation solutions teams. Joy, I'll have you.
If I can go first, Mindshift takes that very seriously. We do disability, autism in the workplace training for all of our business partners. And that will and has continues to change as people become more and more educated and aware of what it is. But that's a really broad, like maybe a lunch and learn type presentation, where we're trying to open up the discussion and say, look through the building, walk through the building. What do you see? What about accessibility? How might something impact a person with a disability? Then I cannot overemphasize the importance of the person-specific orientation to a person who is coming to your organization. And that is something we take seriously as well. We present individuals to the business. And as part of that presentation, we look at how do they learn? How do they think? How do they problem solve? How do they communicate? What do they need? And they have been a part of creating this document as a replacement for a resume. What do they need in order to be successful? Boston Scientific is one of our strongest partners and champions. And Paul has been a part of, and his team has been a part of many of those discussions. But that is something that I can not overemphasize the value of doing that. As far as the accommodation solutions team, that's what MindShift is. Really, that all of our people, our staff people, are accommodation solutions teams. And when we partner with a business, that is a value add that we provide to them. We also are committed to having people within the MindShift organization who are on the autism spectrum. And in the past 60 days, I have hired 2 people on staff positions who are people who are on the autism spectrum. And I look to do that in more of our positions. We're pretty small, so 2 people out of a team of 8 is a good start, I think. Just a start. I look for more.
Elizabeth, can I just chime in too with the training opportunities that we have been doing? We really try to bring the person with a disability doing the training as well. You know, so the speakers are people with disabilities. The project search interns are training the department managers on what they need. And again, that's getting that voice lifted up so they will be ready for leadership positions in the future if they have those kind of opportunities.
Great. Eric, can you maybe talk a little bit about what MDI is doing in the capacity building? And there was, start with that.
I'm going to hit like a few quick questions that I saw in the chat real quick.
Perfect.
So I think the one on caretakers, the anonymous person posted, is a phenomenal one. I think they are underutilized in this whole connection, right? And I think there's a lot of services for things we do as employers. There's a lot of things we do for people directly with disabilities, but they can really be the glue. So I think that's a real big opportunity, and one that I hope that we continue to face into. I posted in the chat, Ren, you've been very active. I appreciate your participation. I don't know you directly that I know, but the Job Accommodation Network is a place where I went to learn quite a bit about the space of accommodations. I think Steve mentioned it, Joy mentioned it, but there's government help and there's a lot of nonprofit help for helping employers. And we may not be directly employing, but really willing to come in and add that insight to help make that connection, just doing the good work. And the last thing I would say is we think that there's these systems that take place, and I think Paul hit it. I've found that grassroots efforts have been the best efforts. It's almost like it starts somewhere in the organization and sometimes you don't know, but then we as leaders have to, it's almost like a smolder, and we as leaders have to kind of get that fire going. So you kind of got to blow on it. You know, are you going to do the right things that allow that smolder to take hold to really get your culture going? Are you going to take the time to listen that was talked about? Are you going to allocate the additional time to hear from the person with a disability? If you make decisions from a point of ignorance, those are usually not the best decisions we make. So bringing informed parties together, I think, can do a lot, and then allow your organization to have enough freedom to try, right? There's no right answers. There's only action, right? So if you take action, you'll definitely be moving in the right way. And I think it was Angie maybe that mentioned it, but you know, just acting normal, right? This is a normal case and situation. I think it can go a long way. And we try to practice those things at MDI. And I think we have room to improve. Maybe Donna mentioned it around leadership. We do really good in the operating, well-defined jobs at our core. But as we begin into other jobs within our organization, we got to do a better job of getting people with other abilities integrated into those jobs. And I think that's where our biases get so entrenched that it's really tough for even us as an employer to overcome, because we've been taught for so many years through books and training and development. You know, a leader shows up, they're like this, right? They got the sports coat on, they exhibit these specific skills. And we have to break down our biases and rebuild them on the individual. And when we start to do that, we start to unlock these superpowers Steve talked about, and we start to see leadership in a very unique and vibrant way that delivers disruptive impact to our organization. So we're on our journey. So I don't want to, you know, make it think like, even though we employ over 200 people with disabilities, that we don't still have steps to take. But it's, you know, are we open for that challenge? Yes. And I think there's many other employers that are as well, especially if they embrace those grassroots efforts.
Great. Well, I'm going to try to tackle a couple of the questions, and I'll direct them as I think have kind of come up through the threads of some of the panelists' answers. But Mike, could you maybe talk a little bit more? You talked about some of the unanticipated wins in workforce engagement. If you could say a little bit more about, I think someone in the chat equated it to a return on investment, right? The ROI, and how Optum is thinking about that as an ROI, or if there's any way that you're quantifying it or articulating it specifically in terms of ROI.
Yeah, and thanks for the question and appreciate the comment from Peter. I think, United Health Group is a metric-driven company. So we had to get this initiative launched based off a strong business case that it made sense to do this as a business. And certainly one of the metrics we're looking at is, how many people that we started the internship program are on our full-time workforce. And what does that impact in terms of the overall workforce today? So certainly as we measure workforce engagement across the board, that's a meaningful metric. I think employees today are looking for meaningful work, and how can we tap into the natural supports within our culture, with all of our cultures, to draw them in, to help them be partners and buddies and allies in this movement as we really foster it. I think that, Eric said it takes a village. Certainly we had senior management support, but it really was the grassroots effort that will continue to sustain us going forward. And we're going to continue to measure that impact on our business as we grow into new markets, as we serve more people with our healthcare services.
Thank you. Paul, I'm going to turn to you, and if you could talk a little bit about best ways to integrate individuals who may not have a documented disability, but do have a personally identified disability, and maybe how your experience in that and how you address accommodating those needs as well.
So for us, everything starts at Boston Scientific with a new hire orientation. And whether it's documented disability or not, it's the same orientation that they're going through. And so they'll understand what the expectations are on the job floor. Our trainers working out on the production floors, in this case, get to know the individual pretty quickly, right? So you're talking about undocumented. So where we don't have the benefit of working with a company like Mindshift, where there's this disclosure and we know what we're entering with it. A lot of that's going to be that one-on-one engagement that the trainers would have with the individual with the disability. They have the experience and are gaining more and more experience as we've expanded in our disability employment efforts to identify things that they might pop up through their regular training initiatives. So if they are seeing that someone perhaps is having a difficult time with reading, they might then be able to approach that individual with, would it be better if we spoke through this work instruction to make sure that you understand what's going on? And so having that level of engagement and having trainers that are qualified to have that level of engagement, I think is something that's been very beneficial. We don't have all the infrastructure in place. And I think that that's an important thing is, businesses are looking at how do we move forward? How do we get started? You don't have to have everything in place as a business. That's what we have, these networks of other businesses and companies in the state to help. I think everybody on this panel wants this to be something that's successful across the state, across the country, across the world, right? And so we get engaged strategically with other companies to help fill those voids that we might not have within our infrastructure until a time comes where maybe we have more confidence in that ability.
Thank you. Well, my apologies. I know we have some direct questions for some of the panelists. We will record all of the questions that were in the chat and provide them to the panelists. So If there's a possibility for follow-up, we certainly will allow that opportunity. I just want to close in thanking all of the panelists for all of the knowledge that they brought here today. Certainly in the chat, there's been some great conversation, not only about some of the challenges, but opportunities. And I think, certainly we can look at compiling. There's been a lot of great resources, and sending those out as a follow-up, we can be sure that those are shared in the follow-up communications that the department has provided. And also some challenges to us as we think about our current labor market, but also how we address these needs moving forward. So really appreciate everyone's engagement. Our hour together went very quickly. Again, thank you to the panel, and thank you to all who attended. Much appreciated, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.